Nigeria's economy recorded a significant trade surplus of 6.95 trillion naira in the second quarter of 2024. And that's according to the latest report from the National Bureau of Statistics. And that's a 6.6% increase from the first quarter, driven largely by crude oil exports, which accounted for nearly 75% of total exports. Spain, the United States, and France are Nigeria's biggest buyers. On paper, the numbers suggest economic growth, with half-year revenues reaching 9.1 trillion naira, and the country's $500 million domestic bond almost fully subscribed, actually oversubscribed. But on the ground, Nigerians are feeling the pinch. Rising food prices, increased transport costs, and the removal of petrol subsidies are leaving millions struggling to make ends meet. President Bola Tinubu has defended his administration's reforms, arguing that these tough decisions are necessary for long-term stability. Well, joining me to look at this development tonight is a renowned economist at SPM, professional Paul Alaje. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so very much for having me.
So, I mean, the president is quick to tout this as something like bearing fruit from his policies, economic policies. But let's look at the details. Total trade has actually declined by nearly 4%. Compared to the first quarter. So how do we reconcile this that we're supposed to be jubilating about and the decrease that we're seeing? Is it really a win, or are we just spinning numbers?
So in economics, there's a concept called money illusion. Money illusion, it appears as though you are doing more, but in the real sense, you are doing less.
Interesting.
Now, when you look at the numbers from the National Bureau of Statistics, because that will be the authority that we base this presentation on, it revealed that our imports, so we start from imports, reduced by 10%, 10.7%. It used to be 13.9, now it's around 12.4. We're talking of trillion naira. Now, when you compare that to what we did last year, the same quarter last year, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, what we did last year was 6.3 trillion naira. This year, we are importing by nearly 100%. But to be specific, we have around 97.9%.
Okay.
So that is increase in imports. So you ask, why are we increasing our imports? I will get to that. Okay. Now, when you look at the countries we are importing from, we still have China that takes over 20% of all imports, but what we sell to China is less than 5%, is less than 3%, is less than 2%. China is not buying from us, but we continue.
There's no balance of trade there
between us and China.
Yes.
Although we have a lot of countries we are selling to, and what are we selling is another conversation entirely. We have China, we have Belgium, we have India, we have the United States that we are buying from. Now we need to take a minute and look at what our exports looks like. Great. And why it's not adding up for many viewers that are viewing us across the globe. Starting from here, Nigeria, we have exports. Exports also increased so significantly to 19.4 trillion naira, and it was up. It was an increase compared to what we had, first quarter at 19.16%. I mean, 19.16 trillion naira. And if you look at the import again, it's over 200%. What happened? Now, we did this time last year, 6.4 trillion naira. Now we are doing 19 points. What exactly happened? We saw this surge. So the implication, this is export. So it should be good news. There is an underlying factor.
And what
the
is
underlying factor is exchange rates. Now, if you used to export this paper, say let's say this is what Nigeria sells, and Nigeria sells this at, say, $2. Now, this $2 before was 700 naira. That means you have sold it at 1,400 naira. Now you have devalued the currency, as at the time of report, to 1,400. So when you sell the same paper, on record, using naira, it will show you 2,800.
I see.
So have you really increased your output? Okay, don't believe me. Go to the same National Bureau of Statistics on report on crude. Have we significantly increased, which they did a couple of weeks back, regarding GDP growth? On what we did on crude, we did average of 1.41 million barrels a day. So there is no significant growth in output. And from this report, petroleum-related products account for over 80% of all exports. So what actually gave us this boost is exchange rates. That is what gave us this boost. And it's traceable to what is being shared at FAC. Because FAC's revenue has increased significantly as a result of what? Exchange rate and removal of subsidy.
So land on that point.
So in looking at it, we have to be very holistic. Now, when an accountant looks at this, accountants don't look at underlying factor. They are trading, and I respect accountants. I have degrees in finance and accounts myself, but it's different from economics. And I'm not saying any bias. I respect accountants. They are respected professionals. But when you are reporting as an accountant, you say with the currency of domestic currency of interest. In this report, currency of interest is Naira. But economists will go one step further and say, let me know what is the real value here. Because we'll go beyond the money, the amount, we'll look at the quantity. So we now compare quantity and amount. Then we can now say, truly, this growth is real. So when you look at what we exported in volume, it's not so different. In some instances, it's even lower than what we did when you base this time last year in dollars and you base this year in dollars. Then you see that we have not really improved. However, our exchange rate has changed a lot of narrative and a lot of discussion for us.
Indeed, and that brings me to the question about President Tinubu speaking about ushering a new era of prosperity. But with what this report has shown, we are still heavily dependent on oil. Over 75% of it is on crude. So when President Bola Tinubu says a new era of prosperity, is that based on things beyond our control or things within our control? Because I'm wondering, where's this prosperity coming from?
Well, when the president said that he's looking at an era of prosperity, it's expected of a leader to speak positively to the people. And that is what he wishes, that is what he wants, that is what he hopes for. After all, his administration is about bringing hope to the people. But when you look at the report as published by the Bureau of Statistics, from our export alone, 88.45 was petroleum oil, according to the report. And what followed it was, so if 88.45 is our export, it can give you an overview of how we actually export, the real revenue from exports, because we are doing less than 22%, about 21.54% for other products, which includes energies we are giving to neighboring country, tobacco and cigarette. We have part of machineries and vessels and so on and so forth. So this is the real report according to National Bureau of Statistics. But how do you build prosperity for your people? It's a conversation. Prosperity has something you must go with. It's called productivity. Are we productive enough?
This report doesn't show that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't show
that.
It doesn't show. Because in terms of volume, we are not so different from what you used to be.
Yeah.
But the value, which is now a reflection of currency of trade, here we are talking of exchange rate play a key role, which is not indicated in this report. If you check this report and you check Debt Management Office report, you see that our debt volume has also increased. Not because Debt Management Office and federal government said we want to collect a lot of more money. No, because the monies you collected in hard currency, we have to use today's currency to evaluate. And do you know that of all in the last, say, 10 years, Nigerians had added not less than 10 trillion, and I'm just being charitable, to debt profile without borrowing any money. Why? Because of consistent devaluation in Naira. But now look at it. So how do you create prosperity for your people? So the structure we are running now, not my figure, according to the Bureau of Statistics, service sector takes over 55% of our economy, but our people are still largely poor. So we need to look at countries that have huge population, perhaps the largest or second largest in their continent, and what are they doing? So I'll give you an example of China and India. Those two countries, India is currently the highest, it used to be China. But which of the sector? They concentrate largely on, what's it called now? On industry. Now, it doesn't mean service don't have a lot of prayer. It does, but industry plays a significant role. When you think of China, what comes to your mind? Is it farm? Is it banking? Or is it manufacturing or industry? Certainly it's industry. You need to look at Brazil. What comes to mind when we think of Brazil? And look at this economy. They are all over $1 trillion based economy. But when it comes to Nigeria, the concern has been how we are going to work on agriculture to grow it, and now we are going to promote
What happens
service.
to talks about diversification? We hear it's become almost a national anthem to say we are diversifying. Every government in power talks about diversification, but yet we find ourselves heavily dependent on that product, which we don't have control of its price.
So I think it's important I quickly clarify this. A lot of persons have said, oh, Nigeria economy is diversified. But we say, to what extent? Does it matter? In the real sense of it, when people or when Nigerians or journalists or economists are talking about concern about diversification,
yes,
we're saying diversification as it affects foreign earnings. And from this report that is right before me, 88% of revenue into our reserve or exports or hard currency, it comes from what? Crude. So we cannot say that our external receivables are well diversified. And in doing this, what must we do? We need to look at...
great question.
So we need to look at our manufacturing sector. We want to produce more finished goods. Because Bureau of Statistics revealed, if you look at what we import, finished goods has major share of what we import from other countries. And that's not my figure, it's Bureau of Statistics that says so. Yeah. And if you look at top 5, finished good takes #1 position. But when we look at what we import, what we import, finished good, but what we export, finished good is not there at all. So how do we change this narrative? If truly we want to create prosperity for our people, how we do it is to look at what are the pillars, what are the blocks that we can change our economy from service dependent to manufacturing dependent. And in doing this, we need to talk about power. You can't produce anything without energy. Energy that is not sufficient, that we are struggling between 3,500 to 5,000 megawatts energy generation, not even distribution. We still increase band A. I remember some international organization advised government, and I took to my Twitter and to my X and said, please, don't follow that advice. The end of it will be destruction. Look at the economy today, inflation, poverty rates. The more the inflation goes up, the more people get into poverty bracket. The more Naira gets the value, the more people get into poverty brackets. Do I think government don't want to do well? I believe government should do well. I believe government wants to do well. But wanting to do and knowing what to do, they are two different things.
Do you get the impression that we understand, the government understands these challenges, but they don't know what to do? Or they don't just want to do it?
Well, it appears so. I will give you an example of 6 countries. The first country is Germany. And I want you to fact check this. Germany had a different currency, not just Deutschmark, that many people know, than Euro. They had a different currency. Immediately after the war, the German government went into economic turmoil, worse than what we're experiencing in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, in Europe, after the Second World War, to be a woman, you have to have multiple partners in the other room. If not, because the law and orders, it was completely not in place. The courts had been burnt. The police, everybody had their rifles. So it was war against all. But do you know that when Germany and the rest of Europe were looking for a solution, something happened. The currency was more or less of no value. Then Germany took a decision. We cannot float the way Nigeria is floating and expect a change to come. We need to do something about our reserve. After that, we need to peg our currency against the dollar and stop all government deficits. In less than a year, in fact, research quote it as immediate, that is in less than 9 months, German economy picked up. Deutschmark became currency to reckon with. The counterparts in Asia, Japan, that have been faced with several economic concerns, also just copied what Germany did. And what happened? The economy went up. Those are 2 countries. In more recent economic concerns was Russia, when we had some Cold War of some sort. And what was Russia's concern? 1971, President Nixon of America took dollar against the gold standard. And that threw the whole world in economic turmoil. And Russia particularly was concerned. Now, Russia felt they should let their currency, to float, just as we are doing. But that continued to kept Russia on its knees up until 1998, 1999, when they had a new leader, who said the first thing we need to do is to peg our currency. Now, this country came out of economic quagmire and saw prosperity. Not just because of currency, because they were also productive. And they understand, for instance, Russia reduced taxes. I hear we want to increase tax from a value-added tax from 7.5 to some. But I'm happy the minister have said
the Minister
no.
of Finance and Coordinating
I've said no because we need, it is not wrong to want to increase, but we need to be concerned about the timing.
Great.
The timing is important. But I need to tell you the 3 remaining countries that did not follow suit. One is Argentina with peso. Peso became one of the worst currencies, if not the worst in Southern America. Why? Because of flotation. Then you come to Africa, where you have Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe currency, as a result of flotation, as a result of currency management, and so on and so forth. Some of the policies with which we have done in the last administration. This is not the first time it's been done in Africa. Zimbabwe was one country that tried them. But what happened to the currency is worse. In fact, Zimbabwe had a presentation on how to produce 1 million Zimbabwe coin. 1 million in one coin. Now leave that. Go to the last country, which is Venezuela. Rich in oil. Rich in oil. Perhaps richer than Nigeria. Perhaps. But what happens to the currency and living standard? And watch these countries. When their currency goes under, when you devalue a people, and they are not exporting, when you devalue, if you want to destroy a people, don't throw missiles, attack them from economy. When 2 countries have concern, I don't want to mention the name of a country, but there are countries that you will know that the first thing they do is to announce sanction on other countries. And it has to do with perhaps not buying their product or not selling to them. Venezuela today, where is the country? Among Committee of Nations, especially as it affects their economy. That is why I am advocating and I'm appealing to the Nigerian government. We need to review this flotation policy. We can choose to face the concerns of our votes. We can choose to boost productivity so that we can export more in real terms and not nominal. So that we will not be looking at Naira account. If we publish this report in dollar, it will be a different conversation entirely. And that is why it's not trickling down to our people.
I mean, that's just busting the bubble. We'll be happy to take whatever small wins we can get at this time in Nigeria. But when the Bureau of Statistics releases this report of a trade surplus and the president hails it as signs of the economic reforms bearing fruit, help us translate this into Naira and Kobo for everyday Nigerians. Does it even translate to Naira and Kobo for everyday Nigerian? And then there's been the surge in exports to Europe, US and Asia, according to this report. But are these long-term gains or are they just short-term busts due to what we're seeing on the global market demands?
It's expected when you devalue your currency, your product becomes cheaper for other countries. So they will buy from you. The question is, what are they buying? What percentage of your population is contributing to that production so that they become productive? Productivity is the underlying factor here, and export. Now, when you look at what we sold to the rest of the world, 88.45% is in petroleum. How many Nigerians are directly engaged in that economy? National Bureau of Statistics told us less than 6% of our economy is in oil and gas. So the remainder are in non-oil. So let's assume everything in oil and gas revolves that. Only less than 6%. That is absolute minority. So how do we say that if we have that, it will translate to prosperity to the people? Perhaps the assumption of government is when money is shared at FAC, the money will go to the federal, state, and local government, and they will use the money to build infrastructure. Well, people can look at this. How many of some of these revenues have been impacted people? And I need to quickly explain the concept of money illusion as it affects governments. Now, government is hoping that when this money comes, they are going to use it to build infrastructure. And this is the argument some international institutions are championed to developing countries. Even though right now there are different, not even now, even in literature, opinions and reports and paper presentation have debunked those positions. Because when you look at the Asian tiger and their miracle, it did not come from this kind of advice. They went directly opposite what those international institutions advised them. So when, as a government, look at our budget, look at the national budget, apart from salaries, even the things we claim we are buying, significant part of that budget is imported. So are we not going to be paying more to import? So with this devaluation, who is benefiting in the real sense of it? Are they Nigerians or foreigners? Clearly speaking, who are we benefiting? That is why it's important. The work we need to do is to build this economy in real terms. Devaluing our currency will only give us short-term gain. Look at since the time we have been devaluing. Look at it. Since the 80s till date, what is the gain? Before now, what you buy a loaf of bread with in the 80s, I mean, what you buy a Beatles car with in the 80s is what you buy a loaf of bread with in 2020 plus.
It
So
does say
how
a
do you
lot.
how do you compare those?
Yeah.
So my point here is that as much as we have wishful thinking of wanting to make economy grow, there are painful parts. The painful part, there must be a future in mind. It's not that just don't worry, bear the pain. The question is how, when, what is the roadmap to making this economy come out of the current quagmire?
When can we see the tangible results?
Exactly.
When you talk about painful decisions, haven't we taken those painful decisions already?
And you know,
with
this is not
petrol
the-
subsidies removed, with the flotation of the naira.
This
those
is not the first
painful
time.
yet?
This is not the first time we're adopting this policy. This policy, 80% similar to structural adjustment program. What happened to that program? Was it successful? And you see that, our real problem is not even subsidy removal. If you remove subsidy, and it's important I hear a lot of people say, oh, subsidy, the price of petrol. That is just a part. The biggest challenge is stability of exchange rates and flotation. Now, when subsidy was removed, we saw what happens to pump price. It went to about 400. Why did he? Why
500 in some places?
500, 600.
Yeah.
Why is it still increasing? Now to 1,110 in one of the closest filling stations to this studio. In Wusetu, Aminu Kano. 1,110. And the cheapest, over 800. Why? It has a direction. The more Naira goes weaker, the more PMS go higher, because it's an international product. And when PMS goes higher, every other thing we follow.
Indeed.
So it's important for us to know that if truly we want to have a stable economy, and most countries in the world understand this fact, they do everything to defend their nation. And the best way to defend is starting with your currency. Because when your currency is weak and you think that the rest of the world, you can sell cheap to them, then you are not a good Samaritan. You're actually a bad Samaritan. You know, one thing, you have to sell yourself cheap. And the way you sell yourself cheap starts from how much you charge. And how much you charge is the value of our currency.
That makes sense.
So I don't think that's the way to go.
Finally, I mean, let's look at the bond that was oversubscribed, as we're told, $500 million. Is that great news? Does that signify growing investors' confidence, or people just want to do quick dash in and quick out?
Now, the gain to government is that we want Nigerians that has dollars to give it to government legitimately. Government cannot just start looking at people's dollar account and taking it. That will create a lot of confusion and doubt about the integrity of government. So the best thing we can do is to take this money officially. But at what cost? Nearly 9%. Can we afford it? A country, West Africa, did this recently, and the country was more or less bankrupt. Immediately after, this government went back to renegotiate with citizens that, sorry, we cannot meet up. What happens to subsequent listing? Nobody was interested. So before we go into this, recall that you have borrowed this money in hard currency. Projection of Naira, is it to get better or to get worse? Even based on reports and what you have seen over the years, you can use 10 years value. How is Naira always performing? Getting better or always susceptible to devaluation? Well, I'm not happy to say, but it's susceptible to devaluation. So when you are paying back, how much exactly are you going to be paying compared to what you collected today? So it's important for us to solve the immediate problem of exchange rate concerns.
Okay.
And I think if we do that, then we can say that we might be looking at something to do in the immediate. So what should we do immediately? Stop the flotation policy. Okay. It's not helpful enough. After that, you need to focus on agriculture. You need to go on energy, especially energy costs and energy output. Most importantly, we need to change the orientation, direction of country into production, which of course it will show how productive we are, because productivity is the underlying factor.
And less dependent on crude, over
Yes.
88%. Alaje, with the economy, it looks like the more you look, the less you see. But thank you for breaking it down for us today. We do appreciate your time.